Well, hello. Welcome to the Creative Writing Life podcast. I am Paul Zeidman. Quite happy to say welcome back to the show, produced screenwriter and best-selling author, hype, Brian Fitzpatrick. Brian, welcome back to the Creative Writing Life podcast.
Oh, so happy to be here, Paul. Thanks for having me back. It's been a minute, so I'm really happy to be here.
It has, for longtime listeners of the show or viewers, since we only started on YouTube earlier this year. Brian was last on with Justin and myself, I want to say maybe 2 or 2.5 years ago. And
Yeah,
boy, have things developed for Brian, and we're going to get into all of that in just a minute. But as regular listeners and viewers of the show are familiar, we like to start things off talking about anything we may have read or watched recently, whether we liked it or we hated it, we were indifferent. I will go first just to give Brian a little time to collect his thoughts.
sure.
I haven't, it was a busy weekend for us, so I didn't get a chance to watch that much. I just caught up on a couple of shows that I'm enjoying. One is called Delicious in Dungeon, something like that. It's on Netflix. It's a Japanese anime, kind of like if you took Dungeons and Dragons and a cooking show and combined them.
I have heard of this. I'm familiar with this. I haven't seen it yet, though.
It is well when it started because it's I think right now they only have the first season. It's 24 episodes. I think they just did the last one. When it started, it was like every episode was a different like, oh, we're gonna make a not like thoroughly about a recipe, but like we're gonna make something out of this monster we just killed. And so it's like, dragon
Yeah.
stew or that kind of thing. And they kind of got away from that and focused more on the story as the episodes went on, but they still were occasionally doing the food thing. And the other one, I've been enjoying it. It's still kind of blows my mind. It's called My Adventures with Superman, and that's on Max. And it's as if they took Superman or Clark Kent is like fresh out of college and he just got a job at the Daily Planet, and he's so it's like the early days of Superman, and it's also done in an anime style, which actually works. It goes really well with the characters, and they've like slightly revised his costume, and some of the characters like Lex Luthor has hair, and so
Whoa.
yeah. So it's they're doing a good job with it, and it's fun to watch, and I can see why it's so popular.
I'm gonna have to check
Brian,
that out.
yeah,
I
yeah,
have not heard of that one. I'm gonna check that out.
yeah, it's a good one. What about
Okay,
you?
so for me, for TV shows, my son and I just finished a little late. We just finished the Bad Batch,
Oh,
Star
okay,
Wars Bad Batch. This was, of course, the final season, and they just closed. The whole season was great, but they just closed it out so perfectly. It was just a great ending. Dave Filoni with the animated Star Wars series, all of them are so spectacularly good, just amazing storytelling, and this was no different. For movies now, I watched one. I watched it Friday, and I watched it again yesterday. Um, Late Night with the Devil,
oh,
the
okay.
horror movie.
I want to know what you thought of that because my wife wants to see that.
It is hands down for me one of the best horror movies I've seen in many, many, many years. And this is
Wow,
I'm a guy who does not like possession type movies typically because they're just so everything after Exorcist is just a clone and copy of
sure,
Exorcist.
sure.
And to me, that subject matter is not interesting usually anyway. It just it doesn't bother me. It doesn't affect me at all. So when I first found out this was like set, it's a fictional TV show, late night show, like competing with Johnny Carson, and he wants to get ratings and brings out on Halloween night brings out this guest in her ward, this young girl who's possessed, and they want to do a demonstration. And oh my God, this the storytelling and the building they did as far as peeling the layers back of the characters, it's perfectly executed, perfectly acted, and went in ways I never thought. And it is a great slow burn horror. It's even funny in parts because they're doing a live show in 1977, so it's going to be a little
Okay.
cheesy. Highly recommend it. I gave it, okay. This is rare for me. I give it a 10 out of 10.
Wow.
It
Okay.
was so
So
good.
yeah, I was gonna ask, so I wasn't sure, is it like straight up horror with a few comedic parts, or is it like a horror comedy? I mean, how would you classify it?
I would say it's
Okay.
straight up horror, with comic elements uh, throughout. Mostly in the beginning as things are light and they're getting
Sure.
deeper into the show,
Hmm.
and then like the third act just goes completely off the rails, like they do.
Sure.
But the best part is they knew how to use the horror and the gore stuff sparingly. So when it hit, it packs a punch because it's just supposedly we're watching like a live TV show. So
Hmm.
it was so well done. I cannot say enough good things about this movie.
Okay, that is a great recommendation. Like I said, because we were kind of on the fence about seeing it, because we're not, we don't really go for like straight out horror. Like the cheesier, the better. But if it's, I have heard a lot of good things about this, so I think we will give it a go and see how it
Oh,
goes.
great. I'd love to hear your review of it upon viewing. I will say this, look at it also from a screenwriter, from a storyteller perspective, because you'll
Oh.
just be so floored. You will be impressed. The screenwriter brain will be very impressed with it.
That's the thing because I've asked that of writers, especially of people who work in film. That is it hard for you to watch something and not watch it as a writer? Like because maybe if the material's good, that you kind of excuse me, you get lost in like the good storytelling. But if it's a
Yeah.
lousy movie, you start identifying the faults.
Oh, absolutely. I agree. If it's really good, I will let myself get completely lost in it. Um, on the second viewing of Late Night with the Devil, I was more in my screenwriter mind then because I
Hmm.
knew what was coming and I can kind of pick apart, oh, they did this because of this and da da da. So, but yeah, definitely. Yeah, and if the movie is, I agree. If a movie's bad, it's like you go right into the mental brain, like, oh, I would have done it this way, or what are they thinking?
Yeah, I was. It was kind of like that for me when I watched Madam Web. Oh man, I don't need to see that a second time.
I have not seen it, and I've heard many a bad thing.
Oh, it's kind of like, a second draft. Yeah, that's enough. We can go into production now.
Oof,
Yeah, trust
ouch.
me.
And
It
it's
it,
got a
it
good, it's got a great cast of talented people, and it
mhm.
just fell apart. I mean, I'm kind of a bum because I was excited to have a Spider Woman type of story come out that was going to be a little different, and the trailer I thought was kind of a cool angle, and then the reviews started coming in from people like, oof,
Yeah, it is that is definitely a leave your brain slash writer's brain at the door and just like and go next door. That's kind of
eesh,
that's what
ouch,
it's like. Okay, so Late Night with the Devil. We will
oof,
definitely give that one a
so
look.
good.
Okay, so Brian, as a kind of a recap, so what is your backstory? What is your origin? So, looking at your website, we know you've been a writer pretty much your entire life.
Yes.
So what was it that appealed to you about writing? Did you just like telling stories, and was there a particular kind of story you like to write? I mean, what is young Brian? What was he like?
When I was a wee lad, no, just kidding. When I was 7 years old, I accidentally watched Night of the Living Dead, and
Okay.
that movie, it completely terrified me, but I was completely riveted. What happened was mom and I were watching classic horror movies, and at that age, even the old Dracula and Frankenstein weren't really that scary to me. We were just enjoying them. Then she dozed off. She fell asleep. Night of the Living Dead came on, and I was like, "What is this? What's happening now?" And I just remember having like a week of sleepless nights, but I couldn't get it out of my head. I had to know how these people are going to get out of this, or are they going to get out of it? Um, and finally, I think she had to find a way to get me past it. So she was like, "Brian, why don't you just try writing your own scary story and see how that goes?" And I was like, "What? I can write a story?" And so I did, and I think the first one was about vampires or something.
Sure.
But I was completely hooked. The thought that I could just think of something, put it on paper, and suddenly there was a story. That just blew me away. And I think I was really fortunate enough to be a teenager in the 80s when Spielberg and Lucas and all these just big, wondrous movies were coming out. All Raiders of the Lost Ark and E.T. and Star Wars and Poltergeist, and then of course
Hmm.
I veered into the horror stuff with David Cronenberg movies, and those messed me up bad. So
Well, what about like Stephen King? I mean, you must have like devoured those.
and I didn't even really get into Stephen King
Oh,
until like my mid to late teens,
okay.
but I've read the book It 3 times.
Hmm.
It I thought he captured the feeling of that 12-year-old, 12, 13-year-old kid. It brought me back to my 12, 13-year-old age, and I thought he brought that nostalgia back so perfectly
Hmm.
in that story. But it was writing wise, book wise, it was Stephen King, Anne Rice, Dean Koontz, and Clive Barker. Those are my go tos.
Okay, so which one, I mean, of those would you say any of them or kind of like a little of each of them was an influence on your particular writing style?
I would say the most influence would probably be Clive Barker because he would had this, even though his stuff was horror, straight up horror, like some of the most gruesome, brutal horror, but he always had a whimsical, almost fairy tale element to a lot of his stories, where it's
Mhm.
sort of this sort of Tim Burton-ish kind of tone to everything. So even though it's something really gruesome is or scary is happening, it's almost whimsical too because the
Mhm.
world building he does.
Okay.
But
All right.
I would say for raising the bar for me, like literary wise, like trying to push my writing skill was Anne Rice because her books were are fast paced, but very literature esque, if that's not a
Mhm.
word. So I think those are my influences there.
Okay. Here's where it gets really interesting is okay, so you're kind of like, really into the horror thing. And then your breakthrough book is not horror from what I remember because I read the screenplay version of it a couple of years ago, and it's Mechcraft. And as your description, it's Harry Potter meets the Matrix. So okay, so
Yes.
so how do you go from like I'm going to write vampire stories and Anne Rice is my influence? I'm going to write this family friendly kind of story.
Well, okay. So yes, actually, the Harry Potter meets the Matrix thing came from one of the early reviews. When someone said that, I was like, "Oh, I'm taking that. I'm,
Okay.
what a great thing to say." But yeah, the idea came to me because it was a screenplay at first. You read the screenplay version. It
Hmm.
came to me when I read a medical journal article about nanotechnology in the future would be used to inject into a person, and these little tiny robots would be programmed to attack cancer cells and then deactivate and flush out of the system. And I thought that is the most incredible thing I've ever heard. And then I said, wait, what if they were sentient? And what if they
Mm.
could telepathically communicate with their host, and the host could bring them out of their skin as liquid metal, like Terminator 2 looking stuff, and then make tools and weapons. So the story kind of expanded from there. Now, if you reading the script, and maybe more so in the book that I converted it to later, there are definitely some horror elements to it. I
Okay.
definitely had the villain go into the R-rated level of violence when she's trying to pursue our hero, and so I couldn't help myself. I had to put some horror elements into it, but it's
Of
basically
course.
sci-fi or even sci-fantasy because the tech that they use looks like magic, really.
Okay, okay, that's cool. So now this is where it gets really interesting is that you wrote 3 books, and so it was called the Metcraft trilogy. And then I found out, oh, there's a 4th book which is coming out later this year. So I
Yes.
mean, did you wrap up the 3 books and said, oh wait, I still have more ideas and how I can continue the story?
Well, that's kind of funny because as soon as the third book came out, maybe a few months later, my publisher said, "Hey, Brian, so do you have any more Metcraft on deck? Do you have any more coming?" Because they like series, they want series.
Okay.
And I was like, "No, I'm cool. I'm kind of done. I want to move on to other things." So I hung up the phone with him, and then something started scratching in the back of my brain. And the next thing I knew, I had mapped out the outline of 3 more books.
Oh, good gravy.
I was like,
Okay.
"Oh, come on. I didn't want to do this." But I just had to continue the story. But the funny part is the fourth book that is coming out is actually a one-off. It's separate from the others, and it's basically an origin story of the villain because everybody loves the villain in this. She is maniacal and she's like the Joker to Batman. She's just
Hmm.
always one step ahead and ruthless, and people love her. In fact, a rock band wrote a song about her. So I'm kind of saying, well, let me give her her own story and tell things from her perspective because in her eyes, she's the hero.
Of course.
So
All
that
right.
will be
That
coming out on Kindle Vella, hopefully by end of summer.
okay. Okay. So you have that one, and you have another 3 books besides that. This is what it sounds
Yes, if
like.
I
Oh
can
my.
ever find the time to write them.
So we've gone from a trilogy to just a flat out series now.
Pretty much, yeah. Maybe the Metcraft saga, we'll call it. I don't know.
Okay, that works. That works. And
I
so
like that word.
in addition to all of that, you also just recently actually I lost my notes that it's a Dungeons and Dragons. Is it actually set in like the Dungeons and Dragons universe? Like you've been, I guess, it commissioned or hired to write a book or write a story?
Yeah, kind of. It's so years ago when Hasbro bought Dungeons and Dragons as a property, they made the rule system called D20 available to the public. And they said, anybody can create a game using our rule system. And it was such a generous, cool thing to do. Well, fast forward now, there's a publisher called Storytellers Forge. And a few years ago, they put out a massive, like 350-page hardback book of a game set in Dungeons and Dragons world. called The Red Opera, and it was a huge success. They crowdfunded it and got like 10 times as much in financing. It was massively successful. So now, fast forward to last year, they were doing another massive game called The Black Ballad, which is basically what happens when your entire party of characters dies. And it's so the story picks up in the afterlife when their souls are in
Oh.
this underworld, and it's the adventure that they go on there. Now, to coincide with that game, they Storytellers Forge approached five or six authors and said, "Hey, we want you guys to write stories, whatever story you want, set in this Black Ballad underworld that we've created." So it was kind of cool. It was a commission, but I was invited to write tell any tale I wanted, and I thought, oh, I played D&D when I was a kid, and in fact, until I was about 25 years old, actually, but I never wrote a fantasy novel ever. And so I was like, oh man, this is a kind of a cool opportunity with a very unique world, and I wouldn't really do any world building because it's already there, but I would have to do
Hmm.
some. And so it became kind of this sort of challenge to navigate pushing in my own ideas, but also honoring what they had already established. So I wrote.
Is this going to be a separate book, or is this going to be part
Yes.
of an anthology?
No, no, it's each author is contributing their own full-size 80,000 word book. And the way Storytellers Forge is going to do this is they are going to crowdfund to get the publishing done right.
Hmm.
And I think in October they're going to start crowdfunding this, and it's basically going to be called Chronicles of the Crossing, because the world that the players play the game in is called the Sunless Crossing.
Hmm.
And so they decided to do this book series called, like I said, the Chronicles of the Crossing. And I'm just honored to be a part of that. I was so happy they invited me in to do this.
Okay,
And
so now you have to work on the new Metcraft book and this D&D book.
well, thankfully, the deadline for the D&D book was May 6th, and I finished it just in time, and got that to them. Longest book I've ever written. It's like 81,000 pages, or words. I'm sorry, 81,000 words.
Wow, that would be a
Pages,
big
yeah.
book.
No, but so now I'm just waiting for their notes from their editor to kind of like clean it up or do whatever changes they want. But so I'm free now to write the Metcraft book, as well as the masterclass that you mentioned earlier. So things are good
Uh,
right now.
Great, great. Have you had any inkling from the editor, like any kind of like, okay, it looks good, or they're just like they're still working on it?
Well, I think it's going to be good. I'm kind of anticipating the notes, but they did, after about a week or two of having that in possession, they did send me a follow up contract to sign to say, okay, we are now moving forward with your book. Here's the deal. And so I assume they like it.
Okay. And I do have to ask you one question because maybe about 2 months ago, we had a pair of writers and they were writing also a D&D/fantasy type story. And so I have to ask, is there a gelatinous cube in your story?
There are no gelatinous cubes in my story.
Oh, you wound me.
Well, I would, because I love them. Who doesn't love a gelatinous cube?
Sure.
But this world of the Black Ballad, there are no uh, animals don't exist
Oh,
in this world. It's only humanoid type of souls. You know, you've
okay.
got your humans, orcs, even former enemy races that used to hate each other are all here, and there's no longer any reason to fight. So everyone just sort of hangs out. It's
Okay.
very interesting. It's a very interesting world.
Okay. Well, I guess even without the gelatinous cube, it sounds like a great read. So okay, we're
Yeah.
looking forward to hearing looking
The
forward to
name
how that goes. Yes.
the name of the book, we just settled on the name a couple weeks ago. It's called To Slay a God.
Ooh, what
That's
a
the name of the
great
book.
title.
Thanks. They came up. We kind of came up with it together, and I'm really happy with it.
Did you come up with that before, or did you and the publisher come up with that before you started, or was that they like started reading it and said, "Hey, this would be a great title"?
It was kind of, we had a title tentatively, and none of us were really happy with it.
Hmm.
And I was like, no, there's got to be something better. And so we were kicking around ideas, and we went in a team, like a Zoom, and someone said to kill a god. Then I said, how about to slay a god? And they were like, yes, that's it.
Oh, that is a great. That's great when that light bulb goes off and it hits on all cylinders. That is
Well, and then
fantastic.
the main publisher said, well, Brian, we could do sequels. You know, you could do like to slay a devil or to slay a demon
Oh,
or to. I'm like, well, let's see how this first one goes.
I thought you were going to say to slay another god.
Yeah, God to slay a god too, Electric Boogaloo.
Oh, yeah, there you go. Yeah, set it in the 80s. That'd be perfect.
Perfect.
So in addition to all of your authoring, you've also done a couple of screenplays that you worked on a film called Simeon Trials, which is currently in post-production. And so
Yes.
like, so how did that gig come about? Because I know you have your own, original specs, but this was like a work for hire type of deal.
Yeah, this was definitely an open writing assignment that I was very blessed to get. A year before I'd gotten hired to do the Simeon Trials, I had worked with actress and producer Gina Nemo from the original 21 Jump Street. She
Hmm.
was producing, she wanted to co-write a sci-fi TV pilot. And she brought me in and we worked together on it and it was a lot of fun. It's a hilariously crazy, everything thrown in kind of script that I really think would make a fun TV show. And then fast forward a year after that, she's still shopping that around. But a year later, she's like, Brian, I got a dilemma. She said, Brian, I've got a director, I've got the actors, I've got the location all booked up, but we don't have a script.
Oh
Her and the
no.
director, I know she's producing it, she's acting in it, but she said they have no script. Her and the director had wanted to do a certain script initially. I guess at one point they decided they didn't like it and they wanted to just sort of throw that out and start from scratch and do something science fiction. And so she knew I'm with my science fiction background, so she called me up and was like, "This is middle of January," and she's like, "Hey, would you do this?" And we are shooting it last weekend of May or last week of May. So I'm like, January to May. Yeah, I can probably work out something. And so, but she said, "Oh, by the way, this is indie project. She's funding it herself, and there's no choreographed fight scenes and no special effects." So I'm like, how am I going to write a
Wow.
science fiction story without those things? But then I remembered who else has done this? Twilight Zone.
Ah,
Twilight Zone did a lot of cool stuff with very little budget. So I
and
just
no
sort of
special effects.
yeah, and so I just sort of channeled my inner Twilight Zone and came up with this. I think it was a pretty cool story, and she gave me lots of notes. So we co-wrote it, and but we only had time to I only had time to do 3 drafts
Hmm.
before she wanted to give it to her actors to start memorizing. So I'm
Hmm.
like, oh god, 3 drafts going to set. So she had the idea to bring me on as script supervisor to kind of be there to make changes on the fly if need be. And the director was like, "Whoa, you want to bring the writer to the set? I don't know, because that's always a conflict."
Sure.
And so I had a Zoom with the director, and I said, "I assure you, this is not my baby. These are not my precious words. I will not cling to the words. I will not be a problem. I just want to create the best picture we can." So he says, "Cool." And so they brought me on set, and man, that was a crash course in what directors really want in their scripts
Hmm.
and what is needed and not needed. I learned a lot because I was, you know, 10, 12 hour, sometimes 14-hour days, being behind this camp, being looking at the dailies and I mean, just doing a lot. And then of course they were shorthanded, so I helped with the lighting and I helped with the camera, and it was a lot of fun.
So,
And it was,
okay, the fact that you were on set as script supervisor, was there a lot, like a lot or a little of rewriting on the fly? Like, okay, we're all set to shoot, and they realize, oh wait, this, there's something, there's a
you
logic
know,
issue here, or the character's like, oh no, like this guy's supposed to be over here, or that sort of thing.
I expected a lot more because I thought we only had 3 drafts. I thought there's going to
Right.
be a lot of rewrites because once you're standing there and they're blocking a scene, I figured, oh, there's just going to be at least some logistical things. But there really wasn't all that much. There wasn't a whole lot. In fact, there was the one part I definitely expected was a very long monologue by this young actress, Gina Nemo's daughter. Actually, she was 18, I think, at the time, and I was like, this character had a really traumatized childhood, and so she was going to give this monologue to another character about that experience. And I was like, this is some really rough stuff. I don't know how they're going to, do this. And the poor girl, she was like, said she had anxiety from trying to memorize this thing. And I was like, oh, I'm so sorry. But she nailed it first take.
Wow.
Everybody applauded because it was perfect. We did 3 more takes just to get, variety. But
Hmm.
that first take, she did pages of dialogue that just came off so well. Because that's a rule I didn't want to break, is having such a long monologue. You don't want to do that. But for time constraints, I kind of had to throw it in there. So I was like, okay, we'll see how this goes.
That is fantastic. So, are you doing more with Gina, or have, like, other directors said, "Hey, I, saw the work you did on this one film. Hey, we need you for this other thing."
Well, I'm hoping that once post-production is done and it comes out, hopefully this year, that will lead to more writing assignments. I really like those. Gina and I do want to do another project together. We just haven't found the right one. She's in the middle of she's writing more herself, and so
Hmm.
she's enjoying that process. And she just finished two projects of her own in more of a comedy realm. And so, yeah, she says we're going to find something to work on together again, though.
Okay, that is fantastic. So, okay, that all of the things that we've talked about, it all ties together because you have an upcoming masterclass that it is helping newer writers or seasoned veterans with author branding, marketing, and building their platform. Now, as we were discussing before we started recording today, that it's primarily for authors, but a lot of the things that you're covering could apply to screenwriters as well, because a lot of writers, no matter what medium you're working in, that you are your marketing department. That you don't
Absolutely.
have a big name publisher behind you, or you have maybe a smaller one, but they're not going to do all the work for you. You have to do the heavy lifting. You've got to get your name out there. And so I was just going through some of the I guess the topics that you're covering, like develop your brand strategy, building your fan base, video creation process simplified. Now that's a challenging one. Create a unique author arsenal specific to your goals. That these are all things that, and I think any writer should take heed and pay attention to, because they think, oh, I'm going to write the best book or the best script, and they just expect the world to come to them. It don't work that way.
No, it
you
does not.
you got to get out there, and you have to again be a
You have to
one
hustle.
person marketing team.
And it's true. And the reason I think the timing is right for this is this year marks 10 years that I've been marketing myself, or in that world of marketing, both as an author and a screenwriter.
Hmm.
And I think I've got enough experience to really help authors, get past, because so many writers, so many of us, we're very introverted. We just want to write our stories and let somebody else handle
Hmm.
all the mechanics of it all. We don't want to get involved in that, but in this day and age, we have to. If if we want to have a career, if we just want to write our stories and be content with that, great, that's cool. But if we want to have an actual career, we have to be our own marketing department. And I feel I have enough experience now, enough tortured experience now to help people avoid some of the nonsense that I endured, as well as show, I went this direction and it worked for me, and this direction might work for you. Because, one of the greatest things about this business is that there's no one way to succeed. There's a million ways to succeed, but that's also kind of the curse of this business, is that
Hmm.
you can't just go to school and say, here's the path, do this.
Yeah.
And so I want to help writers achieve what they want to achieve, their goals. And I've been doing this little videos like TikTok videos and Instagram reels for about a year and a half, with quick tips and quick advice and little blurbs. But now, for the first time ever, I'm compiling 10 years worth of knowledge into one 6 hour day.
Okay, well okay, let's expand on that a little bit. So like because you said like you kind of was trial by fire, you learned what to do and what not to do. Where was there something in particular that really stands out, like, okay, this is something I tried, it was a massive fail,
Mhm.
and so nobody should try this one again. I mean, if you don't want to talk about it, that's totally fine.
Well, yeah, I got to save a lot. I got to save it for the class. But I will say this: certain advertising venues, certain advertising avenues sound great on paper, but they are not good unless maybe you hire somebody who knows what they're doing. Case in point, Amazon ads. I
Hmm.
thought, oh, I'd kind of mastered Facebook ads. I thought, oh, well, how different can Amazon be? Shit, I got this. And man, it just my efforts failed miserably in the Amazon advertising realm. But when I got this new publisher back in 2020, late 2020, they have a whole department that does Amazon ads. And so I paid for some Amazon ads, and they were a massive success. All three books went to number one multiple times. So I'm like, well, then there is definitely a formula, and I just don't know it.
Hmm.
So
Okay.
I'm not saying, in like, for let's just take the advertising angle. I'm not going to tell writers don't do this or don't do that, but I will say when I tried it, this is what I did, and this did not work. but I'm, leaving it open, saying, well, you might have a different result, but just be warned that, be look out for these red flags or that kind of thing. And all same thing with contests and competitions. You've
Hmm.
entered many, I've entered many, and we know they're not all equal. There's
Correct.
some are better than others, and I talk about my experiences with good and the bad, and why I kind of steer away from contests in general now. But there's a few that are still, I think, definitely worth a writer's time, at least for the accolades, at least for the feather in the cap, and to pad that resume. It's always good to do that.
Okay, and also, like one of the things I also wanted to ask you about, like, so I'm sure networking plays a vital role because, as you were saying, that a lot of writers are introverted to begin with, but there are some
Yes.
things you kind of almost have to force yourself to do. Like, I'm a great example of that. Like, I'm more or less introverted, but when I meet another writer, I always try to make it about them. Like, I'm not
Mhm.
gonna say, "Hey, nice to meet you. Let me tell you about all the great things that I've done, and here's all my
Exactly.
scripts." That I like the first thing when I meet a writer is like when I was in Austin and everyone has their badge, like, "Oh, this, my script, and it was a second round or whatever." I would say, "Oh, tell me about, name insert name of script here." And you could kind of see that helps put them at ease because it's not like I'm not after anything. I'm not trying to schmooze you. I'm not trying to,
Yeah,
butter you up. I'm not trying to get something from you. I'm just like, just tell me about your script. I want to hear about it. And you could
exactly.
kind of see their face almost light up a little bit, like, hey, I get, because they'd rather talk about their script than about themselves. And so then they, give me their, 30-second spiel about their script, and then they'd ask me about mine. And hey, I met somebody I know now.
And that's exactly how it works. Then that's what a lot of writers are terrified of, the networking aspect, because they think it's fake and they think it's like transactional.
Hmm.
But I think you and I would agree. I go into networking as I'm trying to make genuine connections with people that I would want to work with or hang out with down the road. So yeah, it's always best to, when you meet somebody, ask them what they're up to, ask them what they're writing about, or ask them what movie they're making, or whatever is on their badge, what they do. And you're right, it puts people at ease when you ask them about themselves, because people like to talk about themselves. I mean, let's just be honest. And also, people who are introverted, it makes it easier if someone is pulling the information, saying, "Hey, tell me about your work," and then that opens the door. And so, an introverted writer can be like, "Ah, okay, they want to know." So then you just tell them, and then of course, like you said, it almost always turns around where they'll ask you about your work,
If you're
and
if you're
that's
lucky. 'Cause
yeah, and that's just how it goes. And I used to dread any kind of networking event. I'd be like, oh, and I'd be terrible in the beginning. I'd be terrible. I'd be lucky if I met one person, because I was just like standing in the corner with my drink. And
Yeah,
now
exactly.
I love them. I love them so much. And I will go and I will walk into a group of people and just introduce myself. And well, I mean, when there's a break in the conversation,
Sure, sure.
politely. But I mean, I'm no longer afraid to just walk up to anybody and just say, "Hey, how's it going?" And compliment them on their food choice or
Yeah.
their drink choice or whatever, with something that they're wearing. Say, "Oh, that's a cool hat," or whatever, and it breaks the ice. And then you start talking about each other's work, and next thing you know, you're getting invited to something.
Yeah, exactly. Like a friend I knew only from social media. That turns out he was at Austin, and we never actually connected until
Oh no.
afterward. Yeah, it just worked out that way. But he said, because we're talking about like, what do you talk about when you're in line or when you're in that kind of group setting, and everybody's kind of like, kind of want to talk to people, but I'm a little hesitant. And so his icebreaker was like he, make eye contact and just smile and say, I think this is where we're supposed to start networking. And so that would kind of like put
Oh,
the other
that's
person
great.
put the other person at ease, kind of like, oh yeah, I know that, I'm taking a lighthearted approach to this as well. And he
That is
said it was great.
fantastic.
And he said he got to meet all these great writers, a lot of them from outside, from around the country and some from outside of the country. And he said it was just really, it helped everybody feel a little more comfortable because I can attest to that. When I was first starting out and I went to a couple of things down in LA, and they had, the thing at the bar or whatever. And I'd be like, I don't know anybody here. And it just feels weird to be like, hi, I'm Paul. And it's just
It does feel weird.
it does. But I think over time I became more comfortable with about myself, and also just kind of like I like talking about my stuff, but I also know not to make it about me or my stuff. I'd always like that's it. Kind of had to learn like trial by fire, just to
Yes.
Ask the other writer about themselves. Tell me about your script. Tell me about your book.
Well, first of all, I'm going to steal that guy's approach about the IT Personal Network. That's brilliant. Um, and also, I have to comment that I've known you a long time, and it's hard for me to imagine that you were ever introverted at a social gathering, because
Well,
we've always clicked and we're always outgoing.
yeah.
It's just hard to imagine you being that way, but
Well,
I, we all we
it
all
took
start that way.
time to get to this.
Yeah.
No, well, no, because when you're starting out, that you just, writing is pretty much a solitary activity.
Hmm.
But everybody goes through the same thing, and a lot of the people experience the same kind of emotions. And so the first time you're in like one of those kind of scenarios and you're not comfortable with it, it's really hard to make yourself comfortable. So yeah, like
Sure.
when I was starting out, I go down to like the screenwriting expo and they had the mixer thing.
Oh yeah.
I kind of told myself I'm going to try to meet at least three people. And the first couple of times I went, it just didn't work because everybody seemed to be engaged in conversation, like, oh, they must know them, and it would just feel weird for me to kind of like try and insert myself into that conversation. I mean, I hung around a couple of groups, but never saw the opportunity for that opening. It
It's
just
not
took
easy.
time. Yeah.
Mhm. It's true. It's not easy, and I would say this too. My method was that I teach people is go to an event and just convince yourself to meet one person, just
Mm,
one person. Then the next time, try three people. And if you backslide and only meet one, you still met one.
yeah.
It takes time. It just, like you said, it just takes time to build up that level of confidence and tolerance of being able to do this. But it's so worth the effort.
Yeah.
I've met so many amazing people and gotten jobs based on these conversations. In fact, I last year I got hired to write an open writing assignment. I didn't talk about it earlier because I never went anywhere, but I still got
Mm.
paid to write a pilot based on an IP. And we signed a contract. I still got paid. They ended up going with somebody else, but I still got the money.
I
So
was gonna say, still got paid.
yeah. But that came from a networking event.
Oh
So
wow.
it's just one of those. That was my next step. Is that we tend to go to networking events that are like, oh, look at all these writers. It's all writers. I advise try and go to the ones that are like, there's a whole bunch of producers, a whole bunch of directors, a whole bunch of editors, because they're all looking to make projects and they're not writers typically. And
Hmm.
so they want to talk. They really like talking to writers. They really like it. And if they have a project and you've had a good rapport, a good conversation, they will call you up when it's time for them to have a script written. So I definitely advise stepping out of the writer zone and meeting with going to events that have producers and directors and so forth.
What about film festivals? Because I've heard a lot of like a lot of
Yes.
people involved in filmmaking attend film festivals. It's not just directors and writers, but I also want to add that when you go to that kind of event, I think I've been to like one or two, and you're talking to someone, and like, oh, what do you do? I'm a director. Oh, I'm an actress. Excuse me. And they say, what do you do? And like, oh, I'm a screenwriter. Oh, because like that like they know that's a skill because they've worked with on projects and they've worked with
Mhm.
writers and they're always like, oh, I could never write anything, but I love to act, or I'm a great director, but I'm a terrible writer. And
Yeah,
so it's almost like you're part of the group, even though you're totally separate.
I completely agree. And that film festivals are wonderful to go to, even the small ones, because you're going to find indie people, and indie people are wonderful to work with because you're not going to get paid much or at
Yeah,
all, but
or at all.
it's the experience is fantastic, and if they do get something made, chances are you'll still get the IMDb credit, which is worth its weight in gold anyway. But yeah, no, film festivals are great. In fact, I am excited because Sundance's little brother, Slam Dance Festival, is moving to LA permanently
Oh, wow.
starting in 2025. So I'm very excited because I want to go every single day. It's like a week long. And so
Wow.
I want to go there as many days as I can possibly go
Yeah.
and just meet a bunch of people, because this is like the punk rock, rebel attitude kind of film festival, and a lot of really cool movies that come from there and cool actors and directors. So you need to come down to LA.
Well, I'm working on getting a crowdfunding for a short that I hoping to film later in the
Oh,
year. And the director I'm
sweet.
working with, she already has like 5 festivals she wants to enter it into,
Oh,
but
nice.
so it's coming together. Let us also talk about this is something I've heard so much about developing your brand strategy. Now, that's something you're going to cover as part of your masterclass, but can you kind of touch on that because that is something like when I was starting out, they never would say like, "What's your brand?" They'd say like, "What do you like to write?" And
Mhm.
everybody says, "Oh, I like to write everything." But but you also everybody
Mhm.
likes to write everything. Or some people like, "Oh, I only do horror, or I only do
Yeah.
silly rom coms." So, what are a couple of pieces of advice you would give to writers, no matter what
Mhm.
they write, about developing a brand? And then so, what do you mean by a brand strategist? Kind of like how I'm going to approach it, and how I'm going to market myself.
Yeah, so I mean, whether you're a screenwriter or writing books, your brand is basically you, your calling card. They want to know who you are in the business. So this is like putting your best face forward, like you are the business card in a way. So when your name comes up in conversations that you're not around, you want people to say, "Oh yeah, that's Brian Fitzpatrick. We can hang with him. Paul Zeidman. We can hang with him. He wrote this, this, and this,
Hmm.
or he is specializing in this, and we need this." And it's basically to get your name out there for the thing you want to be known for. And so I'll target screenwriting. A lot of people like to write in multiple genres, which I think is awesome. But when you're first starting out, me personally, I recommend sticking to a couple of narrow ones: sci-fi, horror, fantasy, rom-coms. Whatever it is you do, so that you are more attractive to representation,
Hmm.
because they want to know who it is that they're going to represent. What is it about you that makes me want to represent you? Oh, you're the rom-com guy. Okay, I know how to sell that. Oh, you're the sci-fi guy. Okay, I know how to sell that. I know who to talk
Hmm.
to. But if you're the guy who does everything, they're gonna be, I don't know how to sell you.
Like
And I've heard that.
I'm gonna send you my rom com and my my slasher film and my
Yeah, and they're gonna be like, I
and my
don't know who
kids
to.
movie.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's great to do all that writing because it hones your craft.
Hmm.
But I would say for samples and trying to get representation or get sold, it's definitely good to stick with some one thing. And then they say, then once you're established, then you can start saying, hey, I've done 5 sci-fi scripts, sold them. I really want to write this rom-com. And then, the manager will be like, well, go ahead, but at least I know you have the name now. You
Oh,
have the
okay.
credits behind you. You can say, hey, Paul Zeidman, he's written these 5 westerns,
Hmm.
but now he's going to take all that success and he's going to write a rom-com based on to take all this, and they're going to be like, all right, I want to read it because they know you've got a background of being able to pull off movies, kind of thing.
Yeah, okay. I want to play on that because one thing I've heard, especially like especially when you're trying to get representation, that you can pitch a script, but also if someone says, "Oh, like what else have you got?" and like you just kind of run down your laundry list of genres, that's not a red flag, but it's almost like a stop sign
Yep.
that because a rep's going to think, well, okay, you came to me saying that you do rom coms, but all of a sudden you're throwing horror and you're throwing a kids movie and you're
Yeah.
throwing
Don't.
noir. It's like, well, which one? I guess
Who are you?
that is especially if you have like as one of the other things you talked about is an arsenal a catalog of scripts or books that you kind of like want to start. Okay, here's maybe like three, like here's I have 3 solid rom-coms, I have 3 solid horror scripts that you're going to want to try and get someone who can work with that. And
Yep.
and for some writers it's kind of like a challenge, like I've heard people who query like, oh, I've got 3 horror scripts. I'm going to go to that, the Hallmark Channel. No, 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 you don't do it
No,
that
yeah,
way.
no, no. uh no, okay, I'll do a case in point. I had a situation where the screenplay for Metcraft, this is I think 2019, 2020. The books were coming out. They were the first book was out, second book was coming, and that got me into with an agent, a fairly large agent. And he said, "Let me read Metcraft. I told him, gave him the elevator pitch. He goes, I want to read that." And I was like, "Oh, thank God! Oh,
I'm
a
in. I'm
full
in.
script, a full script." And he read it and he goes, "You know what?" And he gave me the same answer I got everywhere else I went. I love this, but it's way too big a budget for
Oh.
an unknown IP. And so he says, "I got to pass." But then he said, "What else you got?"
Mm.
And at the time I had an outline for a sci-fi horror, and so it was still in the realm of Metcraft. It was still sci-fi, but it dipped into the horror thing. But it had enough sci-fi that it was in that same vein. Like he would know how to sell me. I knew, and I had the outline for it. And I said, "Yeah, I got this sci-fi horror script, and it's called this, that, and the other. It's called The Dark Below, and it's about this, that." And he goes, "Okay, I want to read that." So I'm like, "This is like a Thursday night." I'm like, "Oh yeah, let me give it another once over, and I'll give it to you like Monday night." And he goes, "Okay." I didn't have the script written. I didn't have the script written.
Oh
So
man.
I'm like, oh fuck. So I that night, Thursday night, and I took Friday off of work. That night, man, I just pounded. I mean, luckily I had a solid outline, so
That's
I knew
good.
exactly what I wanted to write. I just needed to crank out 91 pages, and I got 2 drafts done in 4 days. In fact, I
Oh
had
my.
a reader from New Line on deck on Saturday afternoon when I finished the first draft. I sent it to him, and 3 hours later, he had a stack of notes for
Wow.
me, and I pounded again and didn't sleep, and I got the guy and got it done and got it to him by Monday afternoon.
Wow.
And
Impressive.
he liked it, but he passed on it.
Ah,
But he still said, "Send me anything you got in the future." He says,
oh,
I'll read anything you have." So,
that is fantastic.
but so lesson is, try and stick to the genre. It'll get you. They'll keep asking for what else you got,
Hmm. So
and be
so
cool.
has
Be cool and be professional. And they because the hang factor is stronger than any other element in this inner circles. They won't tell you this, but the whether or not they can hang out with you. Can
oh,
they hang
okay.
out with you for 8 hours? They call it the hang factor. I learned from insiders that plays one of my friends as a showrunner. He said that plays 80% of his decision making on hiring somebody, not their skill, not their craft, the hang factor. So when you're meeting with people, be completely cool, be yourself, and be professional.
I was gonna say, so is this somebody I want to spend what 8 to 12 hours a day with for several months?
Exactly, because his the logic is that this panel I was watching, they
Hmm.
all agreed that the hang factor was the most important thing when considering hiring somebody, and it was literally down to that. They said skill and talent can be, you know, harnessed and can be honed and can be taught if they have some basic. But he said they will take someone who's less skillful and really cool to hang with versus someone who's ultimately skillful and a dick.
Someone who doesn't go around saying, "How dare you question my genius?"
Exactly. So
Okay.
that's a big advice.
Okay, that is great. So I want to wrap this up. So okay, so that one of the descriptors for the whole masterclass is helping newer writers and seasoned veterans. So maybe like just touch real briefly. I was an English major. Touch briefly on so what could newer writers get out of it, and also how cool and what would seasoned veterans get out of it?
Oh, cool. Yeah. So for the newer, this is honestly, if I'm being full disclosure, this is really going to benefit newer writers the most,
Okay.
because they're going to be taught from like day one. You're still writing your book. Okay, here's what you need to do if you want to have a career writing books. And I'm gonna give them step by step, saying, look, you need to start, getting out your name. You need a website. You need your social media. You need these things in place even before the book comes out. I mean, ideally, 6 months before you are done with the book, you should be dropping a little nut, having these social media outlets, having this author hub, these different things where people can start finding you, and then you need to start posting a little bit about it. That's just one part of it. There's a whole strategy list, but for veterans, this is ideal for. I've written a couple books, or one book, or two books, and I do not know how to market myself.
Hmm.
I have been to events and I hate them. I'm going to show people how to get to the events, how to make it comfortable, how to create your strategy, and what strategies to use for people who have written a little bit of a material. You got a couple books under you. That's a slightly different approach than the person who doesn't have a book out yet. But in the end, it's all going to come together because when they reach a certain level, then everybody is on the same level playing field, doing the same kind of strategies, and I found them effective. I mean, I've gotten several jobs. I mean, I'm not Stephen King money yet, but I think I've gotten enough experience and enough jobs that I can help people achieve that. I have a every year I give myself a word of the year. last year for 2023. My word to live by, to motivate me, was accelerate. I wanted to accelerate my career, and I think I did that last year. This year, I don't know why, but the word uplift came to me
Hmm.
in late December, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to make my goal this year to uplift other writers, and so that's why I've been really pushing the short video content about helping different dropping tips and dropping ideas and advice. And I firmly believe a rising tide lifts all boats. So by helping other writers, I am in turn also helping myself. And I just think it's a great thing to do. We all need to help each other.
Yeah, I can't argue that at all. That's sound advice. Okay, so where can people find out more about this masterclass so they can sign up for it?
Okay, so I am partnered with StoryRocket.com, and you can find it on their site. You can also go hit me up on all of my socials. I've posted the links and the registration links for it. At any of my socials, you can find me at author Brian Fitzpatrick is my handle for most everything. Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, um, even Threads. I mean, I'm trying to be on a little bit on everything, and then that's a part of the strategy too. But you can find me there. You can find me on my website, brianfitzpatrickwriter.com. And I think I sent you the links. You may hopefully post them when this gets posted. So I'm going to make it as easy as possible to find out all the goods.
Okay, that's great. And this masterclass, in case we didn't mention before, it is on Saturday, July 13th. So it is coming up soon.
Correct.
Yeah, definitely check it out. It's worth it. I can vouch for Brian's talent and skills. He knows
Oh,
what he's
thank you.
talking about because I follow him on social media and just see he's really busy and he's always promoting his work. And for him to give you this opportunity, do not pass it up. It is worth its weight in gold. So it's brianfitzpatrickwriter.com is his site. And to the direct link for the masterclass, storyrocket.com/branding dash for dash authors is the site. And so you can
Perfect.
find out all the details there. You can check out Brian. Say, hey, Brian, I heard you on that fantastic Creative Writing Life podcast. Thanks for turning me on to that.
Perfect.
Okay, well, Brian, thank you. This has been great, and it's always great to catch up with you on a personal level, but on the professional
You as
level,
well.
I love all the stuff you had to say, all the advice for writers, and that things that people should really take to heart. We both know this is a tough business that you really have to do everything for yourself, and going into it armed with this kind of information and knowledge it's so beneficial.
Thank you so much for having me. And yeah, that if I can help people, that makes it all worthwhile.
Awesome. Fantastic. All right. Brian Fitzpatrick, the producer, screenwriter, and best-selling author. Again, brianfitzpatrickwriter.com and storyrocket.com/branding for authors is for his masterclass. Thank you, Brian, for appearing once again on the Creative Writing Life podcast. You can check out my screenwriting blog, Maximum Z, at maximumz.blog. I'm still on Twitter at Maximum_Z, and I'm also on Instagram at Pez Screenwriting, PEZ. Yes, those are my initials.
Yes.
That's
Everybody
right.
read his blog. It is fantastic.
Ah, thank you. You're too kind. Like I said, he's Brian. I'm Paul. This has been the Creative Writing Life podcast. Thanks for listening. Stay safe, stay healthy, and most importantly, go write something.